Hello and welcome back to the Streamline. My name is CHIKOTI.
And I am MUTINTA NANCHENGWA.
And we come to you again with the top stories that made headlines this week, starting with a change in the administration of the Ministry of Health.
We are also looking at the money that the ministers paid back after their illegal stay in office in 2016.
And then we'll wrap it up with some international headlines, which have to do with Ugandan elections, where Museveni still takes his seat.
You can catch all this on the other side. Welcome back to the Streamline, and we go straight into our first story.
Now, our first story has to do with the Ministry of Health. The scandal obviously is dying down quietly, but we still have to recap on what exactly occurred and what's led to the change in administration. Now, this past couple of weeks, we learned that the Ministry of Health had distributed substandard medicine and defective condoms and medical gloves, and that did not sit well with the public. People have called for the disbandment of the Ministry of Health, starting from the PSs to the minister himself and the directors that were involved. We've had political parties come in and scream out about how it is unfair and inhumane for us to be treated that way. And finally, our president stepped up and did what he could do.
To cut the long story short, Dr. Chitalo has been replaced by former Minister of Water and Sanitation, Dr. Jonas Chanda, who is Member of Parliament for Bwana Mukubwa. Dr. Jonas Chanda does have quite the list of qualifications under his belt. He did obtain his Form 5. He does have a BSc in Biology. He has his MBCHB in Medicine and Surgery, and he does have a postgraduate diploma. What do you think about his qualifications?
His qualifications definitely do stand out, but one must question though, papers aren't exactly easy to put into practice. So yeah, his qualifications stand out, but we'll wait to see what he does.
One of his biggest tasks right now is managing, of course, the global pandemic. And that was his first order of business at the Ministry of Health, where he had a full stakeholder meeting to discuss the way forward with the pandemic. But of course, there are many other pressing health issues in the country. What do you think he should give most attention to?
So definitely there are a lot of other areas he needs to pay attention to, but we should not ignore the fact that he has to pay very close attention to the pandemic. Now the pandemic, we need to see a fight that's either going to be more vigorous or is going to be a sort of continuity from where the previous minister has left, because he did a rather reasonable job in regards to, fighting COVID. But also our current minister has to pay attention to issues to do with perhaps let's say, for instance, the diarrhea that's going on in Luangwa, and also pay attention to the prevalent cases that are going on in Lusaka to do with malaria. So aside from that, I think he stands a pretty good chance at, rebuilding the Ministry of Health's face in regards to how they look to the public.
And speaking of rebuilding the ministry's face, Hakainde Hichilema, the leader of the UPND, has said that the firing of Dr. Chitalo has come a little too late. He says that if the president was really committed in the fight against corruption, he would have completely restructured the whole Ministry of Health. CHIKOTI, do you think that this is just mere politicking?
I don't think so. In my honest opinion, I don't think it's just mere politicking, because you have to consider the fact that, first of all, the PSs are still there as PSs, and the directors that were involved in the exchange with Honeybee are still directors. All we know about is Mr. Chitalo has been, fired from being a minister. He's still part of government, he's still part of PF, and after that, we don't know what happens to the people that used the substandard medicine. We don't know what happened to the people that used the defective condoms and gloves. So it's not just politicking, it's also someone standing up and voicing out what the people need, because politicians do play an important role in, making sure government is held accountable and remains transparent. And I feel like he's pretty much standing up to that right now.
It is very important for people in opposition parties to provide checks and balances to the government, and we think it is important for other political parties to come forward and call for certain things, such as the whole restructuring of the Ministry of Health. But you can tell us what you think in the comments below.
Now on with our second story that made headlines this week, and it has to do with money. Patriotic Front leadership has insisted that all the funds that were being owed by ministers that stayed in power from May to August 2016 have been miraculously paid back. Now, it's kind of funny considering how Patriotic Front Secretary General Mr. Davis Muller came out and stated that no minister should comment on that particular topic, and insisted on the secrecy to do with who paid the money, right? And all of a sudden we've been told that money has been paid back. Approximately in excess of 4 million kwacha has been paid back. Now that raises questions though. Who paid it back? Right? Who paid it back? Or if they want to claim that the PF paid it back, tell us how they managed to pay back that money. Tinta, what do you think?
Now, I think we should recognize that while the Patriotic Front is a political party, it is also a business entity. I think the Patriotic Front on several occasions has expressed that they do have a number of businesses within the country. So it is not entirely implausible to say that the Patriotic Front does have the funds to pay for its members, particularly on an issue that is as contentious as this one.
Now, I understand how it's not entirely improbable to assume that they could pay back the fans, but still, they are a political party that's in power, and they are mandated to be, transparent, and they have to be accountable, especially to do with money, because as citizens, we have two questions. We're going through a global pandemic, our economy is in the slums right now, and then all of a sudden, our political party that's in charge of everything is able to clear off its ministers' charges, its ministers' owings.
Of course, transparency is a big thing in any country and of course in any democracy such as ours. So I do think that the PF should be able to tell us how this money was sourced, how much are they making from their business and such questions. I do think that the public deserves to know where this money came from. It is a little bit interesting that this money has just popped up. However, I would like to see a situation where they're able to say we were able to raise this much from fundraising, or we were able to raise this much from our businesses, or we were able to get this from our savings, because it isn't entirely improbable that they had the money, but we would like some transparency from the Patriotic Front.
That's very true. Make sure to leave us a comment and let us know what you think or what you want them to be accountable and accreditable for. Now, before we hit you with our final story to do with international news, we have for you a bonus story that has to do with our very own Ministry of Religious Affairs. Now, this past week, we've seen our very own Minister of Religious Affairs, Reverend Godfrida, take shots on social media about her statement to do with the national dress and the dress code.
So, Reverend Godfrida Sumaili actually said that she was thinking of instituting a national dress. However, social media users all over Zambia misinterpreted her words to mean a dress code that would be prescribed by the ministry. The minister did come forward and clarify her statement to mean that to come up with a national dress that would be appropriate for people at all times. However, there is something she said that was of serious contention, and that was that how people dress is what is going to reduce cases of rape in the country.
Now, I kind of feel her statement would have gone easier if she kept the whole rape scenario out of the national dress, because when she went on and on about how people's dress code could lead to rape, that just sparked people's minds, because there is no way, in my opinion, there's no way a person in their right mind would rape someone just because they're dressed in a weird way. I mean, you have to consider babies, the underage kids. Do they dress inappropriately, And that's what the rage on social media was about.
Exactly. I think we can all agree that the main underlying reason for rape is rapists. Now, however, if we want to look at this from the perspective of instituting a national dress code, this is something that many people are actually uncomfortable with, for the simple reason that this may now begin to bring in what may be known as draconian laws. If you look at North Korea, you will find that their leader, President Kim Jong-un, has instituted a national dress code, so everybody dresses the same. They have about 9 hairstyles that they are prescribed to wear in the country, which is very stifling.
Oof. It brings us back to a very, very weird time in scripture, And speaking of scripture, I mean, it is the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Isn't, freedom and the respect of one's choice part of the Christian essentials?
Exactly. As we have our constitution at the moment, Zambia is a Christian nation, but we do allow for freedom of expression and freedom of religion. So the idea of having a national dress code is something that may not necessarily sit well with everyone in the country. However, who are we to talk? You guys are the people out there in the streets. Tell us what you think about a national dress code right there in the comments below.
Now, finally, into our international story that made headlines this past week and grabbed the attention of everybody, we take you to Uganda and their elections.
So, on Thursday, Uganda had their general elections, which saw longtime President Yoweri Museveni going against rising political divergent Bobby Wine. Bobby Wine is actually a former pop singer, but he has now taken to the political scene to bring radical change to Uganda, and this has been a very heated race between the age-old dictator and the new voice in Ugandan politics.
Now, the most interesting thing about these elections is what we saw transpire. We've seen them go from an internet shutdown to Bobby Wine tweeting about security at his house and how he feels unsafe and how he claims he has evidence of the now elect president cheating?
This has been a very hotly contested election. President Museveni has been in power for over 30 years, and now that young people want a stream of change, it seems change is not as easy to come by. Biggest opposition leader Bobby Wine only got about a 36% margin against Yoweri Museveni, but he is persistent that he has the evidence to prove that he actually won the election. The international community is watching over Uganda, especially in wake of the internet shutdown, which we feel is very worrying. Democracy does ride on digital rights, and the fact that we had a shutdown in Uganda is very scary.
Now, despite the internet breakdown, Bobby Wine was still able to tweet, we assume, via VPN. And on his tweets, he claimed that he was unsafe, his house was invaded by police. And even more interestingly, he cried foul over the elections, claiming he had evidence that the current president had cheated. And finally, as we wrap up, here are the stories we've had in this episode. Our first story had to do with the administrative change in the Ministry of Health.
Our second story had to do with the paying back of dues owed by ministers from 2016.
And then we gave you a touch of a bonus story in regards to do with the Ministry of Religious Affairs and their national dress and the dress code.
And we took it all the way up to Uganda, where we looked at their presidential elections.
Remember to do the usual, give us a like here and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to follow us on
Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching this week. We will be back next week with more interesting stories in the news that we shall analyze for you. Until then, stay safe, socially distance, and don't forget to mask up.